Hi, I'm still Amrachandra. This is still Jnanavaca. I still am not quite sure what I'm going to say. Sometimes it sort of feels clear, and I think, well, what am I going to say? It was great last night, wasn't it? The people who were here, it was really great. It was such a, we were talking about it in our team meeting, such a clear talk. There's something about the way you sort of roll something out, Jnanavaca, that just feels so accessible to all levels. And even when some of us might have heard this kind of style of this sort of theme in the talk before, actually it hits us in a new way, or it's sort of, there's a clarity to it. And of course, you bring your personal stories, and there's some really lovely laughter as well. I really appreciated that in the talk. You were sort of really sort of bringing your lovely, lovely laugh. I really enjoyed that. So for people who don't know Jnanavaca, who are sort of here for Dharma night, who didn't make it last night, the talk was recorded. So you can hear part 2 tonight. And then what you missed out on, you can hear it, go to the Buddhist Centre, to the website, click on the links. And YouTube, thank you, Jeremy. And find part 1. So I can't say anything about part 1. Jnanavaca is going to say it again. He's our president. We're really, really, really lucky.
Thank you. Primeval Buddha Samantabhadra, infinite light, Lord of the Himalayas, Kashyapana, rainbow-bodied Padmasambhava, sovereign of the visible world, together with the emanations Rigzlinpo, Bhante, Urgyen Sangharakshita, and his 8 great teachers, I pray to you all to grant me your adhisthana. The primevally pure, self-originated shunyata must be realized. Training in the hard-cutting, abrupt, skillful path, attaining the non-dual Jnanakaya, may my manifestations deliver the infinite beings. I wanted to start with a prayer. It's a prayer that I've adapted slightly from a traditional prayer that is part of a practice called the Guru Yoga that order members are introduced to. The Guru Yoga practice is a traditional Tibetan Vajrayana practice where you are asking for blessings from the lineage of teachers, your own personal guru, all the way up to, well, in this case, the archetypal eternal Buddha, Samantabhadra, who is also Amitabha, infinite light. Bhante Sangharakshita came across this practice when he was in Kalimpong in the 1950s, and he had been recently initiated by Kacha Rinpoche in the Padmasambhava sadhana. And then Bhante is, he's been given the name Urgyen as well as the name Sangharakshita. Urgyen is the land, the mythical land of Padmasambhava. So it was like Bhante had been given this connection with Padmasambhava through the sadhana, through his name. And then wandering apparently in the bazaar in Kalimpong, he found somebody selling some woodcuts, some woodcut prints. And he didn't have very much money, but he couldn't read Tibetan. He didn't know what they were. He thought, let's, you know, they're quite cheap. Let's just buy these. And he bought them, and he brought them back, and he showed Kacha Rinpoche, who had just initiated him, and they were practices associated with Padmasambhava. And so Kacha Rinpoche said, this is very auspicious that you have just been initiated into the Padmasambhava sadhana. and now have come across these practices associated with Padmasambhava at the center. Padmasambhava is in a way the guru archetype, and one of those practices is the Guru Yoga from the Carpe Diem tradition. This prayer that I've just recited is from that practice of the Guru Yoga. I have adapted it by adding in Bhante Sangharakshita, my teacher, and his 8 great teachers. I feel that I'm part of a lineage, and I want to start off with that prayer. I'm not going to be able to explain and unpack that prayer. That would be a different talk. But what I want to indicate is that, well, I'm talking about myths of the Dharma life, and I don't mean myths in a negative sense. I don't mean just so stories. I don't mean falsehoods. I mean positive views, positive, deep-seated, imaginative ways of engaging with life, and particularly with our Dharma life. And this prayer for me is part of the myth that I'm trying to live out. It's a prayer that I recite to myself when I meditate. Pretty much I recite this prayer several times every day, and I have done for a while. And it's taken on a potency. When you do a practice like this, I don't do the whole Guru Yoga, but I do recite this prayer. When you do that, it takes on its own sort of magic potency. So I was doing it just before when we were meditating, just now, and I decided to share it with you. For me, when I sort of recite this prayer, I imagine myself as part of a lineage with Bhante above me and his teachers above him, and going back to, well, there's Padmasambhava, there's Avalokiteshvara, there's Amitabha, and I sometimes, well, I add in Manjughosha, who's my Yidam. And what I experience is blessings. I experience, tangibly experience, blessings flowing down. In the prayer, there's a line saying, please grant me your adhisthana. Adhisthana is the word for blessings. And that has a tangible effect, not just in my meditation, but it spills over into life, at least on a good day. It does that. So I wanted to start with that because tonight I want to talk particularly about a way of approaching the Dharma life, a way of conceiving of the Dharma life in the spirit of opening up to the blessings that are flowing from the Buddhas, from the teachers, from the lineage of enlightened beings, right down to us in every moment. It's in the coinage of the myths that Subhuti has come up with, it's the myth of self-surrender. It's the myth where we imagine that enlightenment is always present outside of us, above us, embodied in the teachers and the archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and that we can, as it were, get out of our own small-minded way, and open up to the will and the blessings of the Buddhas. And surrender is a sort of evocative term for that, in that we are surrendering our own egotistical will to have control over what I normally think of as my life. It's a way of conceiving of the Dharma life, which is very, very traditional. It's perhaps not something that sits comfortably in our modern, postmodern world. It's because it's thoroughly religious. It's thoroughly religious. And many people, understandably, are wary of religion, are wary of the whole notion of surrendering in case there's they're taken advantage of in some way. Very understandable, because frankly, religions in the world haven't always done that well. Yeah, and even Buddhism, I'm embarrassed to say, even Buddhism, as we know, in recent times and in the 20th century, has sometimes been co-opted into fanatical violence in a way that is, I don't know, so counter to the teaching of the Dharma that it's almost incomprehensible that somebody could call themselves a Buddhist and perpetrate violence in the way that, unfortunately, has happened. Although perhaps, I mean, I don't know, comparisons are invidious, aren't they? But fortunately, Buddhism hasn't been that prone to that sort of behavior compared to at least some other religions. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that it's very understandable if people are wary of a religious kind of myth. Yeah. And it's also a real shame if we close down to an imaginative engagement with something that lies beyond us. If we can do that intelligently, we open up to a world of, well, imagination with a capital I, not fantasy, but something more real than our ordinary sense experience of this world, you know, that feels so solid, but we know isn't. We open up to something, as it were, more real through this power of imagination. But if we do that intelligently, we don't lose touch with our reason and our humanity. Yeah, we don't lose touch with that. In fact, if we do it intelligently, it's enhanced by our engagement with something beyond. So that's the myth that I particularly want to talk about, surrender, the myth of self-surrender. But I'm aware that not all of you were here yesterday. And so in order to just try and contextualize things, and even if you were here yesterday, I'm glad to hear that what I said, at least Amachandra thought it was clear, but I kind of feel that there's so much more to say that I'm always left slightly dissatisfied with what I managed to articulate. So just to kind of recap a little bit, Subhuti in 2003 gave a talk where he talked about the 3 myths, but actually he then went on to write a paper that sort of articulated 4 myths of the Dharma life. And he's not talking, as I say, myths in the sense of something wrong. He's talking about a deep view that can be very positive about what enlightenment is and how we attain enlightenment, how we become Buddhas. Yeah. And the first myth is the myth that the Buddha is, as it were, external, outside of us. Enlightenment is outside of us, and we grow towards it. We grow towards it by practicing the teachings and following the path. And in doing so, we change for the better. So ethical practice, meditations like the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana help us develop positive qualities. And then wisdom practice builds on that. So wisdom practice by reflecting on the nature of our own experience in the light of the Buddha's teachings of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and insubstantiality. You look at your own experience in that light and you find the true nature of experience is not what we normally think it is. So that is a traditional way of conceiving of the Dharma and the Dharma life. It's a path of growth and development that we follow. And Bhante, as I say, is very, as I said yesterday, is very, very traditional in emphasizing this as the primary myth. But it's not the only way, and it's not the only thing that Bhante emphasizes, because as well as moving towards the Buddha moves towards us. The Buddha moves towards us. If we allow ourselves to open up and become receptive to the influence and the blessings of the enlightened mind, they will reach down to us to the degree that we get out of our own, well, as maybe speak for us, to the degree that I can get out of my own small-minded way the blessings can reach me. And they can be, that can be a very, very transformative way of working. So that's another myth. Myth in a positive sense, because it's true, but it's not literal. Because it's not literal. And this is where Buddhism maybe differs from other religions, particularly theistic religions. Buddhism, at least intelligently practiced, is not literal. It recognizes that the difference between metaphor and reality as it is. Reality as it is beyond all ways of conceiving and talking, all ways of knowing. It's a direct experience. Enlightenment is a direct experience. It's always, when we talk about it, we're falsifying something. All that we can do is use metaphor to point to an experience and guide us to an experience. So these myths are metaphors that are invaluable. You can't do without them. I mean, if we're going to say that Buddhism, if we're moving towards enlightenment, we've got to conceive of it either as out there or in here. We have no choice but to think in those terms. Only when you have glimpses of vision of the enlightenment experience do you realize that in here and out there are metaphors that don't really apply to how things are. So the first two myths are that the Buddha is external and we either move towards the Buddha or we allow the Buddha to influence us, move towards us. Both are true. Both are emphasized very much in Triratna. You know, when we do puja, we're opening up to the influence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That's part of Triratna's practice. It's an integral part of Bante's system. But also when you do the Metta-bhavana, traditionally, when we teach the Metta-bhavana, normally you're taught to cultivate metta through your own efforts. But if you want to, you could do it in a surrender way, surrender in the sense of imagine that the metta of the Buddhas is already flowing and present, and all you have to do is open up to it, and it's flowing for you and for all beings. And you can allow that metta either to come through you or just to flow onto beings, shine onto all beings like sunlight. So you can meditate in that way. And if you haven't tried that, I'd urge you to try that. Because one of the dangers, yesterday we were talking about the pros and cons of each myth, because each myth will have its front and back or advantages and disadvantages. One of the dangers of the development myth is that we strain in a rather grit your teeth kind of way. I've got to squeeze out metta. I've got to become more mindful. And then we can start to get really frustrated with ourselves when we don't reach the blissful, open-hearted love for all, unconditional love for all beings. And then we think, I'm rubbish at this. I hate myself and I hate meditation, and sooner or later you'll end up hating everybody. And that wasn't the idea of the Metta-bhavana. That never was the idea. Yeah. So sometimes, particularly in, I think, our modern kind of very ambitious, very individualistic, very pressurized Western world, there's such a sort of emphasis on striving to succeed. It doesn't always help when you come to practice the Dharma life. It doesn't help when you practice meditation if you're tense in that I've got to get there kind of way. Yeah. So the surrender myth complements the developmental myth, because actually you can try practicing in a very different way, at least some of the time. Try it in the Metta-bhavana, open up to the blessings, the metta that is already there. And that is just as true and just as untrue as thinking that you have to cultivate metta. The truth is more mysterious than any of that. The third and the fourth myths conceive of Buddhahood as within us. And I'll come on to that tomorrow. But today I want to focus on surrender. And yesterday, one of the things that we looked at yesterday is that, look, the developmental myth can be great, particularly if you're intelligent about how you apply your effort, because without making some effort, we won't make progress. It really is true. Oh, I don't know, like when I came across Buddhism, I became vegetarian. I wasn't vegetarian. I was sort of brought up vegetarian, and then I started to eat meat. Didn't really like the taste, but I kind of just, I think I did it unthinkingly and maybe to fit in, and it was easier and so forth. Anyway, when I learned about the precepts in Buddhism, I don't know, the penny dropped and I just became vegetarian. I also, when I started meditating, stopped drinking alcohol. I hadn't kind of thought about drinking alcohol. I wasn't a heavy drinker. I can't handle my drink anyway. I wasn't a heavy drinker, but I was socialized down the pub quite a lot with colleagues, friends, etc. And when I started to meditate, I realized that actually it was interfering with my meditation. So I stopped drinking. Now, both of those changes took a little bit of effort. They took a little bit of, right, I'm going to do something that slightly goes against the habitual current of what I've got used to. And it's going to, particularly the drinking thing, it affected my social life. I didn't enjoy being down the pub with my mates so much when they started getting drunk and I was still sober. And then I didn't want to go down the pub so much, etc. So it took a little bit of effort. Without that effort, how are we going to actually grow in terms of ethics? Yeah, and similarly, meditation. Left to my own devices, I just stay in bed when it's time to meditate. I confess I still do often. This morning. But nevertheless, thankfully, I have learned to at least apply some effort in my life. And I'm not an exemplar. I'm not an exemplar of this development myth. I should have said that yesterday. Maybe it was obvious to all of you. But I do, because I've always responded to the surrender myth. I've always felt that there's something more to reality, something beyond my ken, that I want to open up to. Something of the nature of, well, when I was little, the only way I could conceive of it was thinking that it was magic. I mean, it was before Harry Potter and but I, as a little boy, thought of myself as a magician, as a wizard. And as a little boy, I don't know how old I was, maybe I was in junior school, 7 or so, invented my own religion. Yeah, so I was that sort of weird kid. And I created this god figure, deity, called Yalsva. Don't ask me why, that's another whole story. And my main practice, I mean, it only went on for a few days or months or I don't know, weeks. I don't know. It's hard to remember. But my main practice was to chant Yalsva, 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 which isn't so silly, is it? I mean, but well, it is. It is as well. Yeah, it's one of the pitfalls of this that you can just get into fantasy kind of thinking. This myth, and I did get into fantasy kind of thinking. One of the things that I tried to do at school, well, one winter day, I wanted it to snow because if it snowed, we got extra playtime. We were allowed extra time, and I wanted it to snow. There was an every chance that it would snow, but you know, it was a winter's day. And I managed to persuade the whole class to chant Yalsva under their breath. Yeah, under the breath. I don't think the teacher quite knew what we were doing because you had 37-year-olds all going Yalsva, Yalsva, Yalsva. And it snowed. Yeah. So I was then convinced of the truth of my religion, and I was obviously the prophet. And my credibility at school went up several notches as the boy who made it snow. Anyway, I'm trying to say that I've always had this kind of leaning, rather eccentric perhaps leaning, towards this sense that there's more to reality than I can grasp. I went on to study physics because I was interested in what did modern physics have to say about the nature of reality. And lo and behold, modern physics says that we don't really know what's going on. We don't know what matter is, we don't know what time is, we don't know what space is, we don't know what we certainly don't know what consciousness is. Physics doesn't even really try and go there, mostly. So that kind of what we do know. Oh, and this is what physics taught me, is that our common sense assumptions about the nature of reality are wrong. Yeah, they couldn't be more wrong. They couldn't be more wrong. So that opened me up to, well, it convinced me that I didn't know what was going on. The Dharma, Buddhism, has allowed me to have frameworks, not to have answers, but to have frameworks where I can explore the mystery for myself. Yeah, it doesn't give us neat theories, but the Buddha didn't give you a metaphysical theory that explained the universe and everything. What he gave us were practices to explore for ourselves the nature of experience, particularly the nature of human consciousness. Well, every experience that we can have is mediated through consciousness. So if we can explore the true nature of consciousness, he said, we could be completely free. We could experience a type of consciousness that is, to use this word, transcendental, beyond subject and object, non-dual in that sense, beyond time and space. And therefore beyond the rational mind, beyond the reach of the rational mind. And what Bhante has taught us is, look, we have to use our reason as Dharma practitioners. Reason is really important, but we also have to understand the limits of reason. So you use it as far as you can, and you have to then be prepared to fly beyond those limits. And how do you fly? You use your imagination. But the base has to be a reasoned base. That's why right view and study of the Dharma is so important, because religion, if it just uses imagination and doesn't use reason, can be a force of great harm. Subhuti, when he was talking about the imagination, I can remember the LBC talked about the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. I don't really know anything about the Ayatollah Khomeini, really, but Subhuti had been reading a memoir, and he said that he felt that the Ayatollah Khomeini had had some spiritual experiences, mystical experiences that Subhuti could relate to. But how he had interpreted those mystical experiences was thoroughly deluded. It was that, yes, I am therefore the chosen prophet, and anybody who disagrees with me will die. I mean, I'm simplifying things, but it caused mass death. Does that make sense? And religion has done that when it can distort views, and you can get fanaticism based on the imagination and some genuine mystical experience. So I'm using my Yalzo example as a benign fantasy, but you don't want to go into fantasy land. That's why right view is so important. Studying the Dharma is so important. And when we open up in the way that I'm suggesting, it has to be based on ethics, and an understanding of what the Buddha actually taught about enlightenment and what it is. I also think, well, these myths that I'm talking about, there's perhaps an overarching context for them, which is the Bodhisattva ideal, which is that it's not enough to just want to gain enlightenment for one's own sake. The Bodhisattva ideal says that we try and move towards enlightenment for the sake of all beings. We want to become part of the force of good in the world for the sake of all living beings. That surely is the context, the biggest context, the most mythic context for any of these ways of talking. So when we conceive of the development myth or the surrender myth or the discovery myth or the emergence myth, that's all within this framework of we're trying to do it not just for our own sake, but for the sake of all. The Bodhisattva ideal. I think that's the largest framework. But yeah, this myth, surrender, if you apply it intelligently, can be a real antidote to the rather narrow-willed, egotistical striving that can start to creep into the developmental myth that we talked about yesterday. The other thing I talked about yesterday is that the developmental myth, me moving towards Buddhahood, if we're not careful, can be reduced to secular humanism. If you lose a sense of a transcendent ideal, or maybe never had one, and after all, in our postmodern world, there are lots of many people who don't have a transcendent ideal or don't believe in one, who are steeped consciously or unconsciously in scientific materialism, that matter is all there is. If that is our prevailing underlying view, then this developmental myth and Buddhism itself gets reduced to humanism, secular humanism. Now, secular humanism might be not it's benign and it might be a good thing. I mean, if more people were secular humanists, this world might be a better place. If we were trying to be kind and ethical and sensitive to the environment and the world around us and other people, and if we were all doing that under the rubric of secular humanism, we'd still be perhaps living in a happier place. But from a Buddhist perspective, it's still a limited vision of what humanity is. It's limited. It's not bad, but it's not the best. Yeah. And Bhante coined this aphorism, the good is the enemy of the best. So I think of secular humanism as the good. But I want to, and have always wanted, I think, since I was a kid, wanted to explore what was really going on. I wouldn't have been satisfied with living a good human life. Although, I needed to learn about ethics. I needed to practice more kindness. I still need to develop those qualities further. That wouldn't have been enough. When I first came to the Buddhist Centre in London, the first course I went on was, I went on an Introduction to Buddhism course. We don't do this these days, but this course was a 6-week course, and all we did was ethics. So we did the 5 precepts and an introduction week. And I can remember thinking, yeah, great, but I want wisdom. I want, I don't want to just be more kind and generous. That's what my mum talks about. Do you know what I mean? What about the magic that I've been looking for, as it were? Now, I've grown up a bit since then, and I do think ethics is kind of key. You can go all the way through awareness and kindness. But it can easily be reduced to secular humanist kind of values. That's what I'm trying to say. So the development myth can be prone to that, and then Buddhism becomes what I was saying Subhuti coins as adjustment therapy. It's adjusting our lives to work better in samsara and hopefully make samsara a bit of a better place. And goodness, the world needs that, but it's not the magnificent Bodhisattva ideal. It's not the whole thing. And for me, it's not enough. And that's not why I'm practicing. Now, the surrender myth is very much, you can't reduce it to secular humanism, because it's not. It's just outright religious. It's saying there's something completely beyond you, a consciousness beyond you, that you can imagine as archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, but it's part of the fabric of reality. And you can open up to that, pray to that, bow down to that, surrender to that, let that come through you, and that can transform your life and world. And then you can become a channel for that in the world so that you are a force for good. Now, Bhante has conceived of the order, the Triratna Buddhist order, as a force for good in the world. He said that we are the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara on this plane, whatever that means. We're the equivalent of the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara on this earthly human plane. The 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara is in this archetypal realm, this imaginal realm. We're on this earthly plane and we're the equivalent. That's how he's imagined the order to be. That's tremendous. I mean, that's inconceivably wonderful to be part of that. If we take that seriously, not literally, seriously. Although when I say not literally, I don't mean not literally. I really mean it's more real than say the secular humanist perspective, but it's still metaphor. Yeah. But then everything is metaphor. Everything is metaphor. The notion that I am here and you are out there listening to me, or that from your perspective, you're there sitting, watching and listening to me out here, that is metaphor. Believe it or not, that is metaphor. I don't exist as, I mean, in your eyes, you're having an image of me, maybe. I don't know where that image exists. Does it exist in your head, your consciousness, your awareness, in your eyes? Where does that? Anyway, nothing makes sense from a completely rationalist perspective. Yeah. So we are in the land of metaphor, whether we like it or not. The choice we have is whether these metaphors serve us towards enlightenment or not. And the surrender myth can do that if we're intelligent about it, and if we're not, it can be dangerous. Yeah. So I want us, like we did yesterday, to spend a little bit of time just thinking about the front and the back, the pros and cons. So I've given you some of the advantages of the surrender myth. See if you can think of any others. What's good about this way of conceiving of a life, of Dharma life? Why would we do this? Particularly if it doesn't come naturally to you. Why would you make an effort to engage in activities like puja or visualization practices or mantra chanting or so forth? Why would you? What's good about it? Yes. Tell me your name again. Tom, hi.
I think it opens the imagination. You know, like in a development mode, you could possibly imagine that you might have a trajectory toward enlightenment.
Yeah.
It's purely about stepping forward.
Yeah.
In surrender mode, you open up to this kind of these wild ideas.
Yes.
Avalokiteshvara's 1,000 arms, and you moving toward becoming Buddha yourself.
Yeah, it opens the imagination. It opens the imagination. And the imagination, intelligently directed, can transform us in ways that reason alone won't. Yeah? When you fall in love, if you have ever fallen in love, remember, if you can, the first time you fell in love, that was an act of imagination. I mean, the falling in love, not now the remembering. When you fell in love and that other person looked divine or perfect or wonderful, yeah, believe me, it was an act of imagination. It was an act of imagination. And you could, I mean, I could, what's the word, rubbish that and say, yeah, it's sort of deluded projection and so forth. But but it's not, is it? It feels like an important human experience. Or when you empathize with somebody who's suffering in a way that you perhaps haven't had to suffer yourself, that's an act of imagination. And all kindness in human life is surely based on that sort of empathy. So imagination is really important, really, really important. So yeah, this myth cultivates that in a positive way. Any other thoughts? Yes, yeah. Yeah, and why is that good?
As an antidote to absolutely having to do it.
Yes. 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 So there's something about not relying on self-will, which can be rather tense and strident. Now, I think that that's not to say that we don't need self-will, but if we rely on it exclusively, it'll run out on us. And if we're not careful about it, it can rather lead to tension and even ego appropriation. Even it can strengthen our egotism. You know, I'm now the best meditator or something like that. So this is an antidote to that. It's sort of saying, no, it's not really about me and my will. It's about something much bigger than me that I'm allowing to come through. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it also, you could say it includes imagination. It guards against this ego appropriation and this tightness of self-will that we can get into. It also, I think it includes the heart. It includes, I think that sometimes the developmental model can appeal to the reason and the head, and maybe the will, but not include the heart. And this, I think, can open us up to beauty, for example, is part of this myth. Bante's put a lot of emphasis on learning to appreciate beauty more in our lives and letting beauty be not just something that we might, I don't know, tack on into a more sort of drab life and occasionally be moved by, but let it be a central value in our lives. Beauty, appreciation of beauty, creating beauty, or just appreciating it. Beauty is, he thinks, a sort of forgotten teaching in early Buddhism, and that part of the enlightened experience is to dwell in beauty, to see everything in as beautiful, as shining. So again, that's an act of imagination. It's beyond reason. Why is love and beauty and an openness to something beyond us, why are they good qualities? Because I think they make us fully human. I mean, they're really precious qualities. And I think that we live in an age where what's prized above those qualities is utility and success and power and so forth. You know, I've been reading and well, I was privileged to interview twice Ian McGilchrist, and you know, he's a psychiatrist and philosopher and a polymath, really, and he's arguing that we live in a culture where we are focusing very, very much on a narrow way of living, which is based on utility and power and acquisition, grasping, and that if we're not careful, well, he thinks we're on a bit of a runaway train already, and we're, you know, he doesn't know where that'll end. but he was saying that there are three kind of doorways out of this runaway train, and our culture is in danger of closing all three. One of them is nature, an appreciation of the natural world. And I don't just mean as if the natural world is out there. We're part of the natural world, an appreciation of us being part of the natural world, and the delight of that, and the beauty of that, but the wonder of that as well. And nature, an appreciation of nature. And of course, many of us now live in an urban environment. Fortunately, in Triratna, we go on retreat. I go on retreat. And, you know, I live in Bethnal Green, and yeah, there's a bit of greenery in the park and so forth, but it's pretty grim. But I go on retreat. So there's natural, that's one doorway, he thinks. The other is an appreciation of the arts, all of the arts, not just the visual arts, but all of art. And he thinks that we now live in a culture where art has been hijacked by, well, conceptualized. It's become conceptual. It's been hijacked by this. It's been politicized or become conceptual or so forth, hijacked by the left hemisphere's way of seeing things, he thinks, which is all to do with utility. And the third is religion, and he thinks that most people have lost faith in religion, and again, as I say, for understandable reasons. So I find it fascinating that he's not a Buddhist. He doesn't know about Triratna. He doesn't really know much about Buddhism, but he could be saying exactly the same thing as Bhante is saying. But what Bhante's done is create a world for us where nature, beauty, art, and appreciation of art, imagination, and faith in something beyond self and self-clinging are completely woven into a whole world that he's helped us create. This centre is part of that world, where you can come here and meet people who are also hold these values. And I mean, I've been around Triratna for several decades, and I need to remind myself how precious that is, because it's rare, I'm afraid. Yeah. Oh, that it weren't, but it is. Okay, so what about some of the back of this myth, the dangers of this myth? I've mentioned sort of fantasy that gets into fanaticism or something maybe less awful but still silly. What else is a danger here? Blind faith. Yeah. So what do you mean by that, Nadavira? Yeah. Yes, that's right. You abdicate responsibility for thinking for yourself, and you accept blindly whatever you're told. That puts it very well. If we're not careful, we surrender in that sort of way, naive, credulous kind of way, and open ourselves up for, well, one, exploitation, two, disappointment, and we'll feel that we're not living our own lives. We've handed over responsibility for our own lives to somebody else. That might be a human being that we look up to as our teacher, or it might be an archetypal being in our imagination. But either way, it's not healthy to feel that we're not actively living our life through choice, through our choice. It's quite interesting with surrender, this myth. If you're going to explore this way of practicing, you have to know that you are doing this, that you are surrendering, and take responsibility for that. If you see what I mean. If I want to open up to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in my meditation, I have to take responsibility for what happens, and I mustn't follow it blindly. Say I had a vision of Manjudoshi, and he told me to jump off a bridge. I'd really, do you know what I mean? That's madness. You have to then use your reason and say, hang on, what is that? So you can't blind faith in that sense. Yeah, dangerous. Anything else? Yes. Ah, yeah. Uncomfortable or comfortable. So again, rather sort of go into a fantasy world. And what about the actual reality? Like if I was sort of, I don't know, happily dwelling in some archetypal realm, and then somebody in front of me needed help or just fallen over or something, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm in this realm of Avalokiteshvara, and it's like completely anathema to what the Buddhist path is. Yeah, there's something about Buddhism which always sorts of keeps it real. Yeah. If our head is somewhere in the heavens, our feet have to be really on the ground. So rarefied in that way. Yeah. Also passive. I think we can go passive. Like, oh, I'll just wait until the Buddhas tell me to get out of bed. do you know what I mean? We can go a bit passive and lose responsibility in that sense as well. A bit related to what you were saying. So yeah, all of these ways are they're dangers of this particular myth. And I think that what Bandhi's given us is not just this myth, but the development myth as well. He's actually given us all four, but particularly he's emphasized the path of self-development coupled with the path of self-surrender. And I think they complement each other. If you just have self-surrender, some Buddhists do actually. They in Pure Land Buddhism, the premise, the myth is that, look, I can't get enlightened. I am enlightened by the grace of Amitabha, who has already promised me rebirth in his Pure Land, and all I can do is express gratitude by chanting his name, Amida Buddha's name. Now, Bandhi hasn't said that that's what we should do. He's emphasized development. No, make an effort, get off out of bed, off onto the cushion, practice in a way that develops awareness and kindness, and practice the precepts, and that will often go against the grain of your instincts and inclination. Be a friend to people, reach out, help spread the Dharma, make an effort, work together. Sangha isn't an easy ride sometimes. You have to make an effort. So he's emphasized all of that, and he said, particularly when we're ordained, he gives us this, we are given a sadhana practice. And he said, look, that is, this image is an image for who you really are. It's an image for who you will really become. And you open up to that. So we've got, I think, a beautiful balance, combination of these myths if you use them intelligently. They support each other and they cover each other's disadvantages. Does that make sense? Yeah. I think that's just very, very, I don't know, very intelligent of Bhante, spiritually intelligent. And I think that we sometimes forget that, not all Buddhists have that. He's been very, very clear about explaining the teachings using reason. And he was very, very clear about the importance for clear thinking and right view. And then he's very, very devotional, and very devotional to his own teachers. He was, I think, well, he said at one point, he never felt out of touch with his teachers. If you go to Erdyan House, which is where he lived for the last 5 years at Adhisthana, there are only 2 rooms in a way, his bedroom and the lounge, but everywhere there are shrines. And there are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and photographs of his teachers everywhere. Very, very devotional. And I think that that is the hallmark of somebody who is in touch with reality. I was once told by Prakasha, who in a way I regard as one of my teachers, he said that, look, when you see reality, reality's function is to bless you. When you really see reality, you will be blessed. Maybe you've got a glimpse of that already. Maybe there have been times when you feel lifted up and it doesn't feel like you're doing it, that something is beyond you, is coming through you and lifting you, blessing you. There are these radiant moments where sometimes the world just shines and we haven't done anything to kind of deserve that. Artists know of this. They call it the muse. People have known of it all the time. And Buddhism is saying, no, look, you can set up the conditions for this to arise. So I want to finish with just another story, really, of from an experience that I had. And forgive me if you've heard me tell this story before, but I started with this prayer from the Guru Yoga, from the Carpe Diem, adapted a bit to include Urdhyan Sangharakshita, my own teacher, and his teachers. I started with that. And in that prayer, and in that practice, you imagine above you, at the top, you have Amitabha, who is the primeval Buddha, as it were, beyond time and space, reality itself personified. Then you have the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara, who's the Sambodhakaya form of Amitabha, who, as it were, is the archetypal, imaginal embodiment of wisdom and compassion. And then you have Padmasambhava, who's the Nirmanakaya form, the form that took birth in this earthly plane, as it were. So you've got these kind of levels. Then you have your own teacher, and then you imagine blessings falling down through the crown of your head, filling your body, etc. There's more to it than that. I want to just finish with a story which happened to me last year. Last year, maybe? Yes, last year. So I was on this 3-month ordination course, helping co-lead this ordination course for men in Spain. And one meditation, we're doing, it's about halfway through the course, we'd been there quite a while. One meditation, I'm doing some just sitting, there's no formal practice. And I have a vision of Padmasambhava. And I don't tend to have visionary meditations. I don't see very much at all normally in meditation. And I don't have that sort of experience very often. But suddenly Padmasambhava, the Nirmanakaya in this Guru Yoga tradition, he appeared, the guru, the archetypal guru himself appeared. There was a vision, visual sense of him. It was definitely his sort of image. But more than that, there was a real sense of being looked at. There was a real sense that I hadn't conjured up this image. This image had appeared, he had appeared, and he was aware of me more so than I could be aware of him. Like these piercing eyes looking directly at me, I felt really looked at in a slightly weird way. Now, I was quite concentrated in meditation, and otherwise it would have been a bit sort of alarming to have it. It was that sort of unexpected and that real. Knowing a little bit of about the significance of Padmasambhava, I sort of in my heart and mind said, "Great Guru, please give me a teaching," which felt like an appropriate thing to do. If Guru Padmasambhava appears to you, not a bad thing to say, "Please give me a teaching. Great Guru, please give me a teaching." And he didn't. Yeah, but he continued to look at me in that Padmasambhava's gaze is slightly wrathful. It's a gaze of compassion, but also like, what are you doing? Kind of, there's a wrathful kind of frown, and it's a compassionate gaze. Anyway, that was the sort of feeling of the gaze. No words, no teaching, but he didn't sort of, the image didn't falter in any way. It was just as strong. So I repeated my words. I said, "Great Guru, please give me a teaching." And there are no words, nothing, nothing. So then I think, I can remember thinking, sort of, do I do it again? Do I say it again? Now, if you say it 3 times, the tradition is the Buddha always answers you, whatever the consequences might be for you, whether you like it or not. The consequences might be really painful for you. But if you ask the Buddha 3 times, the Buddha will reply. And I can remember slightly trepidatiously, like, do I want a teaching? What if it's like, I mean, I didn't have a teaching in mind, but sort of looking back on it, the fear would be like, what if he says, look, get out of bed earlier, young fuck, or get a drip, or do you know what I mean? It could be all sorts of teachings that would be a bit shocking. Well, I don't really want to hear. And but anyway, it was there was this kind of momentum in me, devotional momentum. So the 3rd time I said, "Great Guru, please give me a teaching." And there was an immediate response. I mean, really quick. It was immediate and very direct. And there were 4 words that were planted into my consciousness. And that's how it felt. It wasn't like I had thought these words. I wasn't really thinking in a way. I was quite still and concentrated, even though I was able to, in my own way, ask for teaching. It wasn't like I was full of thought, and these words didn't feel like mine. There were 4 words, and they really took me aback to the point where actually I had to come out of meditation. And the 4 words were, "I gave you Bhante." And it was the tone was, "What more do you want?" You silly boy. Was kind of how I interpreted the text. It was, "I gave you Bhante." I, as in Padmasambhava, gave us, me and you, us, Bhante. I feel that Bhante was in touch with a transcendental force, a spirit that came through him, the bodhicitta, the suprapersonal force, whatever you want to call it. He was a channel for that. He was a human being. Of course he was a human being. And I'm not saying he was fully enlightened, and he had his quirks, idiosyncrasies, personality, limitations, all sorts of things. There he was, a human being, who I think became to an extraordinary degree, a channel for a transcendental force that we are the recipients and beneficiaries of, because he created. He said that the order was founded through him, not by him. So his experience was that something worked through him. He says that he was really inadequate to the task of being a founder of a new Buddhist movement, but it happened through him. And he submitted, surrendered, you could say, to that force, and allowed it to create through him the Triratna community and order that we're all part of, that this centre's part of. We are the living beneficiaries of this myth of surrender. That's what Bhante did. And in a certain sense, he's thrown down the gauntlet to us and saying, can we also allow that force, which is a living force of the Dharma, to work through us? Are you and I prepared to surrender so that it comes through us for the benefit of all beings? Thank you.